I'll be the first to admit that in the past I have been guilty of saying some horrible, nasty, and mostly unwarranted things about a good friend of ours, Melamine. Another sheet good which I don't use terribly often, melamine, otherwise known as chipboard covered in plastic. Melamine, probably my least favourite material to work with. I can't really think of too many uses in the workshop. This plastic-coated compressed wood chipboard is cheap, does the job it was designed for well, and modern houses simply wouldn't function without it. Even high-end kitchens utilise it, and it can be a DIYer's best friend. So this project is my apology to an inanimate building material that I have unfairly looked down on for many years. I've not taken on any commissions for a while since the troubles I went through last year, but as my mate Robin Lewis recently said, there's money to be made in white boxes.
I've heard time and time again that if you want to be profitable in this industry, you need to be screwing together white boxes.
Once you've worked out its unique idiosyncrasies, melamine is a material that makes quoting, building and installing a wide variety of DIY projects pretty much as easy as it gets. Now I've got a full video on straight up educational beginners tips on exactly what these challenges are and how to overcome them, which you can check out later. But today I'm going to cover most of them and more in a practical and somewhat unusual project build, a giant battery charging station for my office. As so often happens once folks learn you like to spend your downtime at home playing with your wood, my boss approached me with a problem that could be solved with a little bit of DIY smacking of dead tree bits together. We use a lot of cameras and other battery-powered gear at work, and this is the current state of our battery charging station. So fire hazards aside, this hurts my recently diagnosed OCD on a most visceral and fundamental level. Something had to be done, so I took some measurements of the desk and the chargers on a post-it note, got the boss's approval on the design, and got to work. In my own time at home. Yeah, we'll figure this out later. The first step was transferring my rough notes into a usable SketchUp model. This not only let me see if it would actually go together, but saves time down the track with accurate measurements always on hand, something very important when making custom-fitted solutions like these, particularly when there are angles involved, complicating otherwise square boxes. So why use melamine for your DIY projects or commissions like this one? Well, it's readily accessible, the price is low compared to plywood, and it doesn't change price often like solid timber can. And one of the best things, it requires very little to no sanding and finishing, which can be time consuming and blow out the budget of even small commission builds. You can also often get it for free dumped on the side of the road from old shelving units that are otherwise in good condition, as long as it hasn't gotten wet. In my case, one of my colleagues has recently done some renos at her place and had a leftover piece of white particle board that she thought she could donate to the cause. It ended up being about a third of what I needed for this project, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Thanks, Ash. Fun fact, despite my ironic habit of calling it melamine, as I'm sure a lot of folks do, the professional analytical chemist in me should point out that the correct term is melamine, derived from the German melam, a derivative of ammonium thiocyanate, from which this compound is made. And the three prominent amine groups, these funky little NH2 things right here, that when mixed with formaldehyde and some other chemicals, form a thermosetting plastic melamine resin we are familiar with on the coatings of our kitchen shelves. The more you know. Right, now we've lost 90% of the non-Veritasium audience, let's get on with the build. So far in the background of this educational chat, you have seen me transform a large pile of reclaimed melamine into the correct widths of things. We're going old school with a few of the Craig tools that I used so much before I got my table saw, and they are still useful from time to time, particularly dealing with heavy sheet goods such as this product. When I eventually got it down small enough with the rip cut and the square edge guide, I was able to feed the rest of it through the table saw and cut some 45s, which will provide the angle for the shelving units you'll see in a little while. I left everything slightly oversized on purpose so I could come over to Barber's trimmer and knock it down to its final dimensions. I didn't take my own advice and use blue tape or a fine-tooth blade for the table saw because I do not have one. But here at least on the miter saw, you can see me putting into practice one of my tips of taking a shallow pass through that plastic coating to begin with before completing the cut to help eliminate some chip out. This I discovered is actually solid timber, another donation from my friend Ash, and it will be used as the cleat to stop the charges from sliding off the angled shelves. It was all going very well, and her lovely husband had cut it down in half for me. and it wasn't quite in half. But that's okay, I want to use the reclaimed material and we're breaking out pocket holes later anyway, so we started early with the 720 jig to do one of my favourite little extension jobs, which has gotten me out of trouble on numerous occasions. We'll plug these holes, flush trim them back, paint over them, and honestly, no one's even noticed them on the final product yet. That's a great little hack tip. I think that's pretty much all the components done now, so we can begin our assembly. Another lovely thing with melamine is that plastic coating is super easy to clean. I use a permanent marker to lay out all of my pocket hole joinery, and then you'll see me sighting straight down the actual jig through the hole to see that black mark beyond and get my pocket holes where I want them. Pocket holes and melamine are just designed to go together. They work really, really well. For the flat shelves, I did put pocket holes in the end, but I didn't put them on the angle shelves. You'll see why later. A bit of methylated spirits, or white spirits I think you Americans call it, cleans off all of the layout markings. I'm not using any glue here. Firstly, melamine and glue aren't the best of friends unless you have a specific glue which I do not own. And secondly, with the pocket holes, I simply don't need it. We're just going to screw it together. I know this is a video about melamine, not pocket hole joinery. However, one of the big advantages of that said technique, apart from not needing glue, is you can get away with relatively few clamps, as the screws themselves do most of the holding. This will be the bottom of the carcasses, so these holes will not be seen. To get the second shelf on, instead of trying to measure it and clamp it up, I cut myself a few spaces from some offcuts, slide a shelf into position, clamp it up like the bottom, and use the thwacker for a few gentle taparoos to make sure everything is lined up. And then we drive in the screws from underneath. This specialized pocket hole clamp is one of the essential tools to minimize the usage of other longer clamps in pocket hole joinery, and allows me to quickly get that solid wood cleat screwed onto the bottom of the shelf. And now we get our first look at how it's going to work. Fortunately, we also use Makita at work, so I had a ready model available. But one of the things we desperately needed to address was cable management. I was going to have lots of cables running off a few of these, so I just evenly spaced out 4 holes cut with a Forstner bit on the drill press, purposely through the top angle, so that these would be mostly hidden, but would also allow numerous cables to get through. We mentioned that with melamine you don't need much finishing or sanding, but whenever you cut it, you do get lots of sharp edges. Watch your fingers, I usually end up with nicks and cuts. And having cables run over these Forstner cut holes, I wanted them to be sanded down nice and smooth so as not to wear them out. Then we had the first very, very satisfying fit out where the digital model was great because the millimeter accuracy it gives you meant that this shelf fit in with a few taparoos of a hand hammer. Very, very lovely. Now, it was going to be really hard with the angle to screw pocket holes in from the outside, and the size of these units will not be seen, so instead I marked them out, drilled through from one side, and then drilled in the other side with a countersink bit, just to do basic butt joints. This will be more than strong enough, the charges are not that heavy. Bang in some 2-inch 50mm screws, and then quickly rinse and repeat, not only for the top shelf, but for the second unit. I am making 2 of these. We do have a lot of charges. I'm hoping it's enough. That's the construction primarily done, but there's 2 small problems. Firstly is the ugly edging on the front here. Check out this zoom in. Can you notice the pocket hole repair? You have to look close. Hidden well. And secondly, at the back, where the 45 shelf meets the 90-degree shelf, there is a little bit of give and wobble. So I'm going to make a couple of custom brackets out of this old metal strapping. I'm really not set up for metalwork, but I made myself a makeshift little cutting bench here, broke out the Dremel, and cut myself 4 of these mini sections to secure the angled shelf to the one above it. This stuff is razor sharp, so we flattened it out and then ground off the corners with a dodgily bolted down angle grinder to make it a little bit safer. Pretty sparks. Using one of the 45-degree offcuts gave me the anvil form that I needed to smack these things into the correct shape before attaching them to the units. P.S. Those automatic center punch thingies, available from Carbotech, are absolutely fantastic when working with melamine because they stop your drill bit from sliding around all over the place on the slick surface. I do recommend one. With the wobble taken out of those shells, they were looking pretty darn good. Just the edge banding to go. So I ducked upstairs and grabbed my iron, a bit of greaseproof paper, set it on the dry setting, and run it over a few times. I go through this in more detail in my melamine tips video. Angle it down on the edges. Get a piece of wood or something thin to really smush that glue into the melamine fibers. And then I don't have any of the fancy tools that you can use to do this trimming. I'm sure they're great, I just always found a sharp chisel is more than acceptable. Might take a pass or two, but you get these very satisfying curly pigtails coming off the edges, and they allow you to get into things like the other side of this, not shown, there was a lot of swearing involved, where I had the shelving units sort of making it hard to trim off those edge bits. I probably should have done it before assembly. And just because I have been given a very powerful laser recently, we had to of course make a label for it. Smokin'. Hashtag laser all the things. And we are approaching the install. They are looking pretty darn schmick for Reclaim Melamine, if I do say so myself. A little bit of super glue to patch on the nameplate, and it was time to deliver them to work. Oh yeah, beeswax. Smells great. Don't taste too good though. There's my little strap clamps in action at the back, and those shells are going to provide the holding area for some of those power boards. Here is a reminder of the mess we had once more, and here it is, all installed, cleaned up, lovely, and looking 1,000 times better. I am super chuffed with how this has turned out, and importantly, so's the boss. Now about that day off in lieu. So there you have it. I am very sorry to my friend Melamine, mine, whatever you call it. It's a useful product. Catch you next time. James out.